Welcome to Think Aloud Podcast, a relief station where curious minds think aloud.
If I ask you to picture the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, what flashes into your mind? I mean, most people see that depressing floating island, a massive swirling soup of human waste just sitting there between Hawaii and California.
Yeah.
Holding, an estimated 79,000 metric tons of plastic? It's obviously a major pollution crisis.
And, that mental image is useful for understanding the sheer volume of it all, but it fundamentally misses the biggest story.
Okay.
The GPGP, which is the largest of at least 5 of these big plastic accumulation zones or gyres globally, it's transforming. It's moving beyond a simple pollution crisis and becoming something else, something biological.
When you say transformation, you mean scientists are discovering that the larger plastic debris, the nets, the buoys, the bottles, they aren't just inert trash anymore.
Exactly. They're real estate.
Yeah.
They are. The shocking discovery when researchers started sampling the big stuff, the macroplastics, wasn't just how much plastic was there, but who was living on it. They found thriving, reproducing communities of life that have absolutely no business being thousands of kilometers away from any coastline.
And that's the core of this deep dive. Our mission today is to unpack the sources describing this new artificial ecosystem, a true change in marine biogeography that scientists have named the Neopelagic community.
This isn't just about plastic threatening marine life anymore.
No, it's about plastic creating new marine life habitat.
It's wild.
What's fascinating here is that the high seas are officially no longer empty. So our first focus has to be on how this waste became a permanent raft, completely shifting an ecological paradigm.
Okay, let's unpack that. This idea of rafting. Natural dispersal on floating debris. A log, a piece of pumice from a volcano, that's always existed.
It has.
But plastic doesn't just enable dispersal, it changes the rules of survival entirely. Well, if you look at the contrast, the differences are just stark. A natural raft is scarce, it biodegrades, its journey is pretty short. Plastic, on the other hand, offers extreme durability. Decades, maybe centuries. It's incredibly buoyant, and its abundance is just constantly increasing. It provides stable, persistent real estate.
And we have proof of these long journeys, right? I remember scientists really started to focus on this after the 2011 Japanese tsunami.
Correct. That tsunami generated just an enormous amount of debris that carried nearly 300 different coastal species all the way across the Pacific Ocean.
300 species.
It proved that long-distance travel was viable, and that really set the stage for what we're now seeing in the gyres themselves.
So let's define this term you used, Neopelagic. What does that actually mean when we talk about a new open ocean community?
Well, neo is new, and pelagic is the open ocean. So these are established communities, and I really want to stress established of coastal species surviving, growing, and critically reproducing on ocean plastic.
Far from land.
Far from any continental shelf.
Which just challenges our entire traditional understanding of the open ocean. We always saw it as this, vast blue wilderness.
Traditionally, we thought the open ocean was inhospitable for coastal organisms for 2 main reasons. First, there's no hard, stable habitat to attach to. And second, the area was basically a food desert. Plastic, well, it instantly solved that first problem. It provided a solid, permanent floating substrate where one just never existed before.
So we've got this new apartment complex, but how do we know who's actually moved in? How do you tell the difference between a transient hitchhiker and a species that is truly making a home and reproducing out there?
They did some incredibly detailed analyses. For instance, they looked really closely at 105 large plastic pieces from the North Pacific Gyre.
Oh.
And nearly all of them were carrying life. They counted 46 different kinds of animals in total. We're talking about true coastal organisms like sea anemones, barnacles, hydroids, even crabs, the plains crab specifically. And the presence of juveniles, of young organisms, confirms they're successfully reproducing right there in the gyre.
That is incredible. So a sea anemone, which should be on a rock near the shore, is now reproducing hundreds of miles from land, attached to I don't know, a detergent bottle.
Exactly. And the biogeographical tracing is so compelling. Most of the animals they identified traced directly back to the Western Pacific, especially the coast of Japan.
So it confirms the long-distance transport idea.
It does. The plastic is acting as a rapid, permanent bridge, letting species bypass these huge ecological barriers that have existed for millennia.
So this is where the complexity just ramps up. What happens when these newly established coastal communities, these new tenants, start interacting with the native open ocean species that have been out there all along?
That mixing is where we get the potential for what is called an invasional meltdown, and that is a major ecological concern.
That sounds intense. What does an invasional meltdown actually look like in this context?
It's a cascade effect. So the first species to arrive, the sessile ones that attach and stay put, like barnacles, they act as eco-engineers. They physically modify the smooth plastic surface, making it easier for other species, often mobile and potentially invasive ones, to move in.
So the plastic itself might be slick and hard to live on at first, but once a barnacle sets up shop, it creates shelter. It builds a foundation for the next wave.
Precisely. The sources point to barnacles, often from the genus Lepus, as these prime base species. They colonize the smooth plastic, and by doing that, create a complex, structurally diverse habitat that lets mobile creatures like amphipods and crabs thrive where they just couldn't before.
And we know that structure is key. I saw that the research showed nets and ropes, with all their twisted forms and pockets, they host the most life.
Yeah, it's like a 5-star resort compared to a flat slab of plastic.
Right.
And this structural modification is measurable evidence for the meltdown hypothesis. Researchers found a direct positive correlation.
Between what?
The number of mobile animals on a piece of debris was directly related to the number and biomass of the attached stationary species. Basically, the more stuff that's growing on it, the more other creatures move in.
Can you give us a concrete example of that?
Yeah.
Biological codependency?
Absolutely. One study cited certain invasive bryozoans. They're these tiny aquatic invertebrates.
Okay.
A species called Tricelaria inopinata. They found it hosting up to 19 other species on a single raft. And this included 3 mobile introduced species that just wouldn't have been there otherwise. It's a rapid, self-reinforcing invasion cycle.
It's a huge shift. And because plastic is so durable, it means the threat isn't just about a localized invasion anymore. It's about increasing the global distribution for species like arthropods, annelids, mollusks.
It is. The sources say it's doubling the probability of transport for some of these major groups. Our global waste has, well, it's inadvertently become the most effective vector for biological invasion the oceans have ever seen.
Okay, let's shift our gaze from the floating islands for a minute and zoom all the way down to the smallest scale. Because while macroplastics are creating these new coasts, we can't forget the issues we've known about for a while. Entanglement, ingestion,
Still huge problems.
and the chemistry. The sources showed that 84% of GPGP plastic had at least one persistent bioaccumulative toxic chemical on it, a PBT.
That PBT finding is so critical. These are chemicals like certain pesticides or flame retardants that are chemically attracted to plastic polymers. They glom onto it.
So the plastic acts like a sponge for toxins.
It does. And once they're absorbed, they don't break down easily, and they accumulate up the food chain when something eats that plastic. It adds a chemical threat to the physical one.
And as this legacy plastic continues to float and churn, we face this continuous supply problem, even if we stopped all plastic production tomorrow. This is the fragmentation gap.
This is a crucial, often overlooked concept in global policy. The fragmentation gap means that the existing large plastics, the nets, the bottles, will continuously break down into secondary microplastics for decades.
From sun, from waste.
Exactly. This continuous flux is a built-in supply line of new pollution that our current policies they often fail to account for it.
So we're not just dealing with today's waste, we're also guaranteed a fresh supply of microplastics for the next half century, just from what's already out there.
Precisely. And even at that microscopic level, plastic is still engineering ecosystems. This brings us to the microbial communities that colonize these small fragments, what scientists have termed the plastisphere.
The plastisphere.
And this microbial community is fundamentally different from the one just swimming in the seawater around it.
So who are the main inhabitants of this microscopic city?
Researchers found bacillus bacteria and pennate diatoms were the most abundant life on fragments from the North Pacific Gyre. And intriguingly, the type of plastic really matters.
How so?
Foamed polystyrene, like styrofoam, harbored significantly more bacteria than the common stuff, like polyethylene or polypropylene. It shows there's a polymer specificity.
That's happening at the surface. What about the plastic that eventually sinks? Does that ever really break down in the deep ocean?
Sadly, the deep-sea research shows immense stability. I mean, they retrieved plastic from the abyssal plain over 4,000 meters down that had been sitting there for almost 2 decades.
Damn.
The bulk polymer showed no physical or chemical degradation. It is persistent on a geological timescale.
Wow. Okay, so if it's not breaking down, what kind of ecological havoc is it causing down there?
Its prominence creates a very subtle but worrying problem: artificial chemical gradients. Researchers noted the microbial community on this deep-sea plastic was really distinct and included groups like sulfuromonas that need low oxygen or even zero oxygen conditions to survive.
But the deep sea is generally oxygenated. How are these bacteria creating an anoxic environment?
The plastic basically acts as a diffusion barrier. Imagine placing a tiny lid on the sediment. The microbes on the plastic surface rapidly consume the localized oxygen right underneath it.
And the plastic lid stops it from being replenished.
Exactly. It blocks the natural exchange of water and gases, causing strong, localized oxygen depletion. The plastic is physically and chemically rewriting the rules of the microenvironment, making it suboxic in an otherwise oxygen-rich zone.
And if that wasn't enough, plastic is also an effective vector for pathogenic microbes, right? Including ones with antibiotic resistance genes.
Yes. So we're not just moving coastal crabs. We could be moving all sorts of biological threats. It's a layered problem, from the macro invasion of species down to these microbial threats.
Given the scale of all this, let's end by looking at the solutions and the context the sources give for cleanup efforts. We know organizations like the Ocean Cleanup are out there deploying these huge systems.
And those efforts are vital. The science is really backing them up. Peer-reviewed studies using what's called net environmental benefit assessments, or NEBA, confirm that the environmental gains from removing that plastic outweigh the potential costs of the cleanup process itself.
So it's not just a feel-good effort. There's a quantitative ecological benefit. And the research also helps guide how to clean up most efficiently.
Right. They looked at Nustan, the native communities floating near the surface. They found these native communities often show similar or even lower abundances in the highest plastic density territories, the so-called hotspots.
So by targeting the worst areas.
By targeting those dense hotspots, cleanup groups maximize the net environmental gain. They remove the most plastic while minimizing their interaction with the native surface life. It's smart, data-driven cleanup.
This all just brings us back to the sheer scale of the waste problem. I mean, global plastic waste is estimated to hit over 25 billion metric tons by 2050. These colonies of coastal raptors are only going to grow.
I think the fundamental takeaway is this. Our waste has inadvertently engineered a permanent new global ecosystem, the Neopelagic zone. It alters millennia-old biogeographical rules, it creates new pathways for invasive species, and it brings all these associated microbial and chemical threats. The high seas, which we once saw as empty open water, are now an artificial coastline.
Which leaves us with a provocative thought for you to consider. The large, buoyant plastic we discard today will likely remain on the ocean surface for decades, maybe centuries, providing this floating real estate. If the open ocean can sustain coastal life on a permanent artificial substrate, what are the long-term evolutionary consequences of introducing this new persistent coastline into the heart of the world's gyres?